For 3 decades, she walked into a studio and did the one thing most people in media were terrified to do. She spoke the truth out loud. No filters. No apologies. Every morning, millions of people tuned in. Not because she was polished. Not because she was safe. But because she refused to be either. At the height of her power, she was the most talked about woman in daytime television. Her name was carved into a street in her hometown. Her star glittered on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Her voice was immortalized in the Radio Hall of Fame. She built an empire from nothing but nerve, gossip, and a voice that never asked permission to exist. And then one day the loudest woman in the room disappeared. Not by choice, not by retirement, but through a chain of events so brutal and so ironic that it feels almost unreal. A woman who spent her life exposing other people's secrets eventually lost her own voice, her independence, and the stage she fought decades to stand on. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to the beginning. Because the collapse of Wendy Williams only makes sense once you see how hard she fought to rise in the first place. Wendy Joan Williams was born July 18, 1964, in Asbury Park, New Jersey. A coastal town that carried the smell of ocean air and restless ambition. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and standing out could be either a blessing or a curse. She was the middle child of 3, raised by 2 educators who believed discipline and excellence were not optional. Her father, Thomas Williams, made history in 1969 when he became the first black school administrator in Red Bank, New Jersey. It was a quiet milestone in a country still shaking from the aftermath of the civil rights movement. Her mother Shirley taught special education, giving patience and attention to children many others ignored. On paper, it looked like a perfect household. Education, structure, expectations. But perfect households often hide their own kind of pressure. By 6th grade, Wendy already stood 5'7". She wore a size 11 shoe. She was tall, loud, energetic, impossible to ignore. In a world that already had rigid expectations for how a black girl should look and behave, Wendy fit none of them. She was too big, too loud, too visible. Her parents worried about her weight and placed her on a diet while she was still in elementary school. It may have been meant as concern, but the message landed differently. Years later, she would talk about those moments with brutal honesty. The feeling of being examined, measured, and judged inside the very home that was supposed to be unconditional. The girl who would one day analyze the insecurities of celebrities on national television had spent her childhood quietly battling her own. Her sister Wanda was the academic star. Straight A's, Tufts University at 16. The kind of daughter that parents proudly brag about. Wendy wasn't that student. She was restless, hyperactive. Doctors even suggested medication to calm her energy. So she threw herself into everything she could find. Marching band, swimming team, school volunteering, announcing baseball games for her little brother's league. Anything that could turn the chaos inside her into something acceptable. But nothing captured her attention the way radio did. Late at night in her bedroom, after the house was quiet, she would lean close to the speaker and listen to New York City radio stations drifting across the airwaves. The DJs talking between songs fascinated her. They weren't just voices. They were personalities filling entire cities with sound. There was power in that. Even before she fully understood it, she knew that one day she wanted that power to be hers. In the early 1980s, she arrived at Northeastern University in Boston chasing a communications degree. At the college station WRBB, she found her first real microphone. And something clicked instantly. Where other students sounded nervous and formal, Wendy sounded natural. Magnetic, direct, fearless. Listening to her didn't feel like a broadcast. Felt like a conversation. She graduated in 1986 with a communications degree and a voice that refused to behave politely. But ambition in the media world of the 1980s didn't automatically open doors, especially for an outspoken black woman. It meant waiting, knocking, fighting. Her first real opportunity came from somewhere far from the spotlight she dreamed about. A small radio internship in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The audience was small. The conditions were humble. But it taught her the architecture of radio. how to pace a story, how to hold attention using nothing but a voice, how to make strangers feel like friends. When she returned to the mainland, she carried that confidence with her. Soon she landed at radio stations in Washington, D.C. and eventually New York City, the place every ambitious radio personality dreams of conquering. By the late 1980s, she arrived at Kiss FM in New York. At first, she was only a fill-in DJ, just another voice covering empty shifts. But Wendy Williams had no interest in blending in. She talked about celebrities the same way ordinary people talked at kitchen tables. Blunt, unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortably honest. She asked questions publicists desperately tried to avoid, and audiences loved her for it. By the early 1990s, she had already won Billboard's award for Best On-Air Radio Personality. The tall girl from New Jersey who had once felt too big for every room had become the loudest voice on New York radio. But behind the success, private storms were already forming. In 1994, she married Bert Girigori. The marriage lasted 5 months. It ended quickly and quietly, leaving behind confusion and rumors. Around the same time, another secret was growing in the shadows of her career: cocaine. It had become a constant companion during her radio years. The public heard the confident voice on air. But behind the microphone, Wendy was fighting a battle no one else could see. She later admitted it openly. The addiction was real. The chaos was real. And love alone wasn't enough to fix it. After the divorce, she threw herself deeper into work. And it was during that chaotic period that she met the man who would shape the next 2 decades of her life: Kevin Hunter. They met at a skating rink in 1994. He wasn't part of the media world. He had run a beauty salon and knew little about radio or entertainment. But he felt steady, grounded. For a woman who had spent her life feeling too much for everyone else, that stability felt like home. They married in 1999. A year later, their son, Kevin Hunter Jr., was born, a child Wendy would later describe as the greatest accomplishment of her life. Meanwhile, her career exploded. At Hot 97, she created something no one had ever heard before: radio gossip that felt fearless. She named names, repeated rumors record labels tried to bury, asked questions artists were never prepared for. Some loved it, others hated it. One interview with Whitney Houston became legendary: tense, uncomfortable, unforgettable. Moments like that made Wendy Williams famous. But they also made powerful people angry. In 1998, she was fired from Hot 97. Official explanations were vague. Unofficially, the message was clear: she had pushed too far. Philadelphia gave her a second chance at Power 99. And she rebuilt everything.